We'll now take a look at how we would actually measure the efficiency of an algorithm. The study of the efficiency of algorithms is called the analysis of algorithms. And this is an important part of computer science because we talked about before that the main thing is being able to design algorithms. So we need to make sure that they are efficient. So this is a very key part in the computer science field. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at some different types of algorithms. We're going to analyze them, and we're going to try to take a look at how fast they run. And here we're looking at the number of steps, how much total work is being done, not how many seconds it actually takes. Let's start by taking a look at our sequential search algorithm that we did a while back. So remember that we had a list of n names in a phone directory, and there were n telephone numbers that went along with those names. So we would look for a specific name, which we call name. And what we would do is we would just start at the very beginning of the list. And as long as we haven't found the name, and I in this case, which is our counting type variable, is less than n, we'll check to see if name equals ni. If so, we'll print the telephone number associated with it, and we'll set found to yes. If it's not true, if we haven't found the name at that particular spot, then we're going to add 1 to I and move to the next name in the list. And we just keep doing this until we either get to the end of the list or we have found the person. And if we haven't found the person, then we'll just print that the name was not in the directory. The main thing that we're doing in this algorithm is that we're comparing name with every single item in the list. And we just keep repeating this. We're going to keep comparing our name with some entry in this list until we either find that name in our phone book or we've gone through the entire list. So if that's the main work, then let's take a look at, well, how much work is involved. So I mean, how many comparisons do we need for this algorithm? Well, there's a couple ways we can take a look at it. We can take a look at the best case scenario, which would be just a single comparison, where the name is at the very beginning of the list. If it's the first item we compare it, then we just need one comparison and that's it. Okay, so that's the best case scenario. What about the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case is that the name is not even in the list at all. I was about to say it's at the end of the list, but it may not even be in the list. And that means we have to go through every single entry in that list. So that means we would have n comparisons because we check every single one of them and we find it's not in there. Now, what about the average case? Because I mean, the best case and the worst case, those are some extremes here. But on average, we'll be more or less about n over 2 comparisons, where the name would be somewhere between the beginning and maybe the end of the list, so maybe somewhere in the middle. Now, when we analyze algorithms, we're usually concerned with just the worst case scenario. Don't get me wrong, looking at best case scenario and average case scenario are fine, but when we're analyzing algorithms, we care just about the worst case scenario, because if we think about it, it makes sense. If we say an algorithm takes this much time and it's the average case scenario, well, what happens if someone runs the algorithm and encounters the worst case scenario? It's going to take a lot longer than what the person initially thought, and that's usually not a good thing, because then they're going to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, I thought the algorithm takes this much work, but it's taking this much more work in order to solve the problem. So we want to at least say up front, worst case scenario, this is how long it's going to take. So that means that for the sequential search, the algorithm requires n comparisons, where n is the size of the input. And what this means is because the number of comparisons and the size of the input are pretty much the same, we say that the amount of work that the algorithm does is linearly proportional to the size of the input, which means is as we increase the size of the input, the amount of work that the algorithm does increases by a similar amount. So like in this case, if we have 5 items in our list, we're going to do 5 comparisons at the worst case scenario. If we have 100 items in the list, we're going to do 100 comparisons, worst case scenario. If we have 1,000,000 items in the list, worst case scenario, we're going to do 1,000,000 comparisons. So we see that this linear trend in terms of the size of the input and the amount of work that's being done. Now, what about the amount of space that we need? Well, for our input, we need the list of names, the list of phone numbers, and our target name is part of the input. So all that is considered just the input for the algorithm. So we basically have 2 lists and then 1 variable for the name that we're looking for. Okay, so that's our input. So for analyzing the space, we need to look at how much additional space we need for our algorithm. Well, in this case, all we need is just some space to store the value of I and some space to store the value of found. So we really just need two memory locations. And when we compare that with the list of names, which could be very, very large, this is very insignificant, just two memory locations. So we can say that sequential search is very, very efficient in terms of space because we just need a very small amount of additional memory on top of the size of the input. Now, you may be asking about the additional operations that the algorithm has. Sure, we're comparing a name with the list, but what about everything else? What about setting the values of variables? What about incrementing stuff? What about the if and else statements and all that, or the printing? Well, these operations take a very little amount of time. So little that they really don't have an impact on the total amount of work that we're doing. Because remember, the amount of work is with respect to the size of the input. So if our size of input is very large, these operations are very minuscule. So these operations are what we call constant operations. So for example, something like changing the value of I. So whether we're initializing it or incrementing it by 1, it takes just a small amount of time compared to doing all the other operations that involve our input. Now we denote this work done by constant operations using the letter C. So C in this case is a variable. And what this means is the actual total work that's being done in our algorithm is Cn, where C is the work done by constant operations and n is the size of our input. So the whole point here is that C is going to be a constant value, which means it's really insignificant when n is very large. So for example, let's say n is 10 million. Now you might think there is a big difference between like 10 million and 20 million, assuming that C is 2. But as far as computations are concerned, it really is not that big of a difference when you consider how large n is. In fact, when we're analyzing algorithms, we don't even factor in C when we try to analyze how long an algorithm takes. Whenever we're describing the work that's done by an algorithm, we use what's called the order of magnitude notation. Now, this notation differs just a little bit by books. Some books will use big O, or what's called the big O notation. Some books will use capital theta or theta notation. Now, there is a distinct difference between big O and theta, but just to be consistent with the book, we're going to use theta for our order of magnitude notation. Now, for the sequential search algorithm, we mentioned before that if we have an input of size n, the number of comparisons is also n. That means that this algorithm is said to be of order of magnitude n. So we denote that as theta of n. So notice the parentheses around here. So we're talking about this part right here is our notation. So we just say theta, open parentheses, n, and then close parenthesis. So this tells us that the algorithm is of order of magnitude n. And so when we're going to take a look at other algorithms in other lectures, and we're going to classify them based on the order of magnitude of their time efficiency. And so what this means, for example, for sequential search, we call it a theta of n time algorithm, or a theta of n algorithm, or what we call a linear time algorithm.